Gethins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank Madam. It is an absolute privilege to follow the right honourable member for Rushcliffe, and I welcome the applause from the Labour Party benches as well.
Well, some of the benches.
From some of them. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the weekend we passed the halfway mark between the EU referendum and actually leaving the European Union. It's difficult to argue that over those 500+ days that we've spent that time well, that the government's got a clearer idea of where we are, that the votes that were made by the Minister and his colleagues in Vote Leave have come to pass already closer to reality than they were when they actually made those promises. And we're certainly no closer to a post-Brexit utopia that we've been promised.
There's the £350 million.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think those looking back on this debate in years to come, as well as admiring the speech by the right honourable member for Rushcliffe, will also look back on these debates with a sense of bewilderment. Not only is this Parliament set to approve a bill, if this goes through, that most members seem to think is a bad idea. Most members think that leaving the EU is a bad idea. But we are also being asked to make significant changes with an extraordinary paucity of information like no other piece of legislation may be forced through on such little information. And it's astonishing that 500 days on, the government remains clueless about the impact of its plans. We've still not seen the impact assessments that this Parliament voted for, and that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we were promised. This would have actually been quite useful ahead of this debate today, actually, had this government been listening to the Parliament. And all of this by members opposite who wanted to bring back decision-making and power and so-called sovereignty to the House of Commons. What's clear is that after all this time, either the impact assessments are being hurriedly rushed together right now, or they're too feared to share them. I was too scared to share them, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the front bench. Last night's botched efforts to try and win support illustrate the desperate situation in which the government and, frankly, this Parliament finds itself. We've been given a choice that we can actually approve a really bad deal, or we can approve a really, really bad deal. That is no choice at all, and one that we should avoid at all costs. The right honourable member for Rushcliffe raised an important point about promises that were made. And there's a point here about accountability. Good governance in any parliament, in any legislature, relies on being accountable. It's the whole idea why those of us from Scotland travel down here, why those from elsewhere in the UK have to make their way here every single week to hold the government to account. Indeed, the Secretary of State for leaving the EU is not in his place at the moment, but it was one of the principles on which his 1999 bill, Parliamentary Control of the Executive, was laid out so that government could not sideline this place. I'm wondering if the government would be in its current pickle had the Secretary of State's bill been passed in 1999.
The irony.
Accountability is sadly lacking here, and parliamentary control should go deeper than even beyond June 2016. All of us here should be accountable for the commitments that we make ahead of any election or ahead of any referendum. All of us should do our best to implement the manifesto on which we were elected. All of us, regardless of how much we may disagree with each other, we have a responsibility to our electorates and we are accountable to them. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm left with a quandary, and I'll happily take an intervention from the government side if they can tell me this. If, and if only, if this place is accountable, who's accountable to provide £350 million a week to the NHS? Who? The government deny it. Who's accountable that Scotland would get lots of new powers, including that over immigration? And who's accountable over this full access to the single market that many of those in Vote Leave promised as well? If only the EU had been successful in getting rid of double-decker buses, you wouldn't have so many promises to splash across the side. I'd happily take an intervention over the accountability on this. And if I want, and I'll take an intervention from the Honourable Lady.
For the honourable member giving way, would you like to add to the list the comments, for example, like Dan Hannan, who argued for leave, who said, don't worry, you can vote for leave because we will stay in the single market and we will stay in the customs union.
The Honourable Lady makes an excellent intervention and a principal one. And to double down on that, I'm actually going to quote another Conservative as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to quote the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. The problem is with quoting her directly is that I'm going to have to paraphrase what she said, because if I read out the quote, I would be held out of order in this place. Because she said, and I have to paraphrase, I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, she called into question the veracity of claims on costs in terms of the EU, the veracity of claims that were made by people who are in government on Turkey's EU membership and on an EU army as well. And I'm sorry that I cannot quote her direct, but I'd find myself in a bit of bother. Now, Ruth David, I will gladly give way to that gentleman.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. Is he aware of the work done by Economists for Free Trade, which says the £350 million promised to the NHS is fundable? And is he aware of the agreement yesterday at the European Union on a European army? Both of these things can easily be answered.
Yes. Well, I'm delighted. If only the government had seen the talents of the honourable member, then he could have been in government implementing these changes. And when it comes to increasing funding from the NHS, I very much look forward to the conversations that the honourable gentleman and I will have as we pass through the same lobbies together when we seek to get the health funding that was promised by those who are now actually in government. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Today that in fact the Honourable Gentleman from North East Somerset does have his supporters in the Cabinet. In fact, the Department for International Trade was retweeting gleefully until they deleted it the speech he made earlier, which called for a race to the bottom, low regulation Britain.
Cardiff South makes an excellent point, as always, on these points. Now, the honourable member, I'll make some progress and come to the honourable lady just shortly. Now, honourable members and I, the honourable member for Cardiff South and I may not agree on much. Ruth Davidson and I may not often agree on much, but she was right that we deserve the truth, that this place deserves the truth and deserves accountability over the promises that were made. And I'm wondering if the Minister, who's in his place, who is making these promises a part of Vote Leave, will address that and will tell us what's going to happen about all these promises. Now, these promises were made ahead of a plebiscite. These promises were made to the people before they voted, and he has a responsibility on that. And I'll give way. I'll give way to the honourable lady, and then I'll give way to the Minister.
Well, the honourable member agree that people voted to leave the EU because they voted for a better future. They didn't vote for Brexit at any cost, including the cost of democracy.
The honourable lady makes a good point, and I'll take one more intervention from the Minister since I mentioned him, and then I'll make progress with my speech.
I hope that the honourable gentleman will read the report of the Treasury Select Committee during the course of the referendum campaign, which has the names of myself and my honourable friend from North East Somerset on it. It called into question the veracity of claims on both sides of the campaign.
If only the Minister was trying to absolve himself of spending on the health service. If only he'd done that before the EU referendum. If only he'd stopped them putting it on the side of a bus. This is extraordinary. This is the thing. These vote leavers are ministers now. You're in the post. It's the post that they wanted. They need to take a bit of responsibility, deliver on your promises. If Labour get into government, quite rightly, these benches will be expecting Labour to deliver on its promises. And it's something that, going on that I won't at the moment, I'll make some progress, as I promised the Deputy Speaker I would. So this is a question. In any future referendum, on any issue, are we all just free to say whatever we like, because there will be nobody to be held to account for what's held afterwards? Surely members must recognise, I won't at the moment, I made a promise, surely members on all sides must recognise the damage that has been done to politics as a whole by the empty promises that were made by Vote Leave. And frankly, on this bill, this is one of the many reasons why it deserves to fall. Now, on the point of compromise, and the honourable member for Birkenhead made a good point on this. We need to have compromise in a parliament of minorities. It's almost a year since the Scottish Government published its compromise that would have seen us remain part of the single market, a point raised by the honourable lady. Now, leaving the European Union is not something that I want or wanted. It's not something my constituents voted for. It's not something that my nation voted for. However, the nature of compromise is one of give and take. And remaining part of the single market was not just an SNP compromise. It came from experts, because we still listen to experts on this side of the House. It was one that was taken by members of other political parties. It's one that was pushed by the Secretary of State for Scotland and the leader of the Scottish Conservatives as well, that we should remain part of the single market. And I would urge members to look at that deal. Our Amendment 69, instead of having us crashing out of the European Union, would have us retaining membership of the EU until we can sort this out. I think it's important, and we'll be backing Amendment 79 from our Plaid Cymru colleagues tonight, because I think it's important that democracy does not begin and end in this place, but the devolved administration should have a key role in this process as we go along. And we are now in the situation, I'll come on to him in just a moment, and we're now in the situation whereby no deal is becoming more and more of a reality, and I'll touch upon that in my concluding remarks, but I'll give way to honourable gentlemen.
We'll remember during the referendum campaign, the former Chancellor said that should we leave the European Union, we'd be leaving the single market. It was made absolutely explicit. But he has spoken about future referenda. He's spoken about future referenda, and he wants a second referendum in Scotland. Now, should the Scottish people vote in that referendum, 52% to 48%, to leave the United Kingdom, will he be arguing for a third referendum after much discussion?
This is extraordinary, isn't it? It's extraordinary. You know, something that the Scottish Government did before the independence referendum and had the decency to do it was that the Scottish Government produced a 670-page white paper. I say this. Now, there are members here, and I point to that member for Edinburgh West, did not agree with it, and she campaigned, and I respect her for campaigning, to vote no, but we had the courage of our convictions to lay out what we stood for. And the mess that we're in today is because this side of the House did not have the courage of their convictions to lay out what voting leave would mean to the European Union. And that means that a no deal would mean 80,000 jobs gone in Scotland. Cities like Aberdeen losing £3.8 billion, Edinburgh £5.5 billion, and an impact on rural areas as well. And on security issues, and I welcome what the Prime Minister says on security issues we should pull together, we would lose access to the EU security databases combating cross-border crime with a no-deal situation. That's grossly irresponsible, and I'll give way to the honourable lady.
To the honourable member for allowing me to intervene. And may I just say, from the perspective of Northern Ireland, that no deal would be absolutely disastrous. It would mean, inevitably, a hard border. And for those of us who've grown up in Northern Ireland, who grew up through 32 years of violence, killing and mayhem, I am not prepared to sit in this House and allow this House to go down the route of no deal, which endangers people, UK border officials, PSNI officials along the border. It is imperative that we have a deal.
I'd like to thank the honourable lady. I think members on all sides of this House would do well to listen to the words of the honourable lady and listen to them well. Northern Ireland was an area that was vastly overlooked and continues to be overlooked, and the honourable lady makes an excellent point on this. Because one thing that concerns me is that, and should concern members on all sides, is that we have a no-deal scenario. We have ministers playing Russian roulette with our futures, with the futures of people in Northern Ireland and across the United Kingdom as well, a slash-and-burn approach to politics which will profit absolutely nobody whatsoever. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll conclude with this. All of us may disagree on a lot of issues, but when we come to this place, we do so hoping that we leave the UK, our constituencies, our respective nations, that little bit better off. And I respect members as they try and do this. By backing this with this level of lack of preparedness, that we do no such thing to leave future generations better off. So weak are the arguments of those who back leaving the EU. I've heard them, not so much on the SNP benches because Scotland voted to remain, but I've heard them to tackle Labour colleagues, Conservative colleagues and other colleagues, trying to question why they are trying to put down amendments instead of challenging them on the substance of the amendment that we're putting down. We will seek to amend this bill as it goes through, and we will seek to find common cause with colleagues from across the House. However, we know that what we're trying to achieve, even if we do seek common ground, is to make this situation not better, but less bad. And that is not a situation in which any member should ever find themselves when they come to this House. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would urge members to reconsider. I would urge the Government to press the reset clause. There is far more at stake than the future of this Government, or indeed the future of any of the members of this House. Thank you for your time.